Good evening. I'd like to call to order the November 15th Town of Kerry Planning and Zoning Board meeting. All board members and staff are participating remotely. Our board clerk, Julie Mitchell, will now call the roll for this evening.
Good evening and thank you. The following board members, Andy Coe, Mary Jo Hill, Jessica McClure, and John Sorrell are not able to join us this evening. When I call your name, please state either present or aye. Stephen Crutchfield,
Aye.
Don Hamilton, Don Hamilton,
Aye. For some reason it's going in and out.
Jeff Moncrief,
Aye.
Jessica Pearson,
Aye.
Michael Roselli.
Aye.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
Okay,
Crutchfield.
that was quick. But we do have a quorum tonight, though, even though we do have 4 members out, so they shouldn't have any problem conducting our normal business. Tonight's meeting will include some new business for the board, as well as our main objective is some board education presentation by the town staff. Tonight, there are no rezoning cases to consider. The board will take action on the 2022 draft of our Planning and Zoning Board work plan. Because we are working remotely, I will call on each board member individually to confirm their vote. These meetings may be streamed on the Town of Kerry website as well as on YouTube, and they're available to view past meetings if there's an interest. The second item on the agenda is going to be the adoption of the agenda. Would someone please make a motion to adopt the agenda?
Don, I make a motion to adopt.
Okay, Don, a second.
Second.
Jessica, okay, thank you. Okay, I'll run down the roll call for approval of the agenda. Don Hamilton, Don, are you still on mute? No, you're not.
Aye.
Hi, thank you. Jeff Moncrief,
Aye. Or yes.
Jessica Pearson,
Aye.
Mike Roselli,
Aye.
and I, Steve Crutchfield, also vote in the affirmative. There is the next option is going to be the approval of the regular meeting minutes. This is approval of the October 25th meeting, and it's in your packet. Can I get someone to bring a motion forward to approve the October 25th minutes?
Jeff, I'll so moved.
And second?
Second.
Thank you, Mike. Right, perfect. I'm gonna call the roll to vote on the approval of the meeting minutes. Mike Roselli,
Aye.
Jessica Pearson,
Aye.
Jeff Moncrief,
Aye.
Don Hamilton.
Aye.
And Steve Crutchfield also votes aye. As we do not have any cases to review this evening, we can move on to our current new business for the board. The Planning and Zoning Board calendar for the year 2022 was in your agenda package to review. And I think we're going to show it on the screen here. Yep, there it is. We're not really voting on the calendar as it is will be final approval by the town council. The board typically meets the fourth Monday of the month. May and December meetings traditionally have been moved at times to accommodate for the holidays. For just an initial comment from myself is for everyone to maybe focus on the November meeting date in particular, as well as December, and then we can just have an open discussion. I'm really not going to go, since there's so few of us, I'm not going to go down the call out names. So if you have any feelings on on the calendar itself, please share.
This is Jessica Pearson. I did look at the calendar earlier today. The November 28th is actually the Monday after Thanksgiving week. And so I think it is actually a good fourth Monday. And I don't have an opinion about the December 19th meeting. It seems like that would be better because it's before when Christmas is traditionally celebrated. And then a lot of people do take time off from the Christmas holiday to the New Year holiday. So those seem like reasonable dates to me.
I also felt they were reasonable, except I just wasn't sure about people. Most people have to be back on that Monday, so I thought it would be okay, but I just really wanted to make sure that you guys were all good with that.
The November date, Steve?
Yeah, the November the 28th. That's the Monday after Thanksgiving. So everyone, no one has any concerns about that date?
I don't think so. And personally, I think that if it winds up being 4 weeks from October 24th, then I would have a bigger concern with trying to do 3 weeks or 5 weeks instead.
Okay, perfect. Any other comments or concerns on any of the
No.
items on the calendar?
Look good to me.
Okay, awesome. Don, you good with it?
Yes, sir. No problems at all.
Perfect. Okay, well, seems that there seems to be buy-in on the calendar. I guess really at this point, we really don't vote on this because, like I said, the council approves it. But I guess Deborah, you could go forward that everybody was in agreement with it and felt it was something we all could work with.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. The next item on the agenda is the work plan, and it's popping up on the screen now. This work plan is very similar to what we've had in the past. Um, it is something that we all should be familiar with, and hopefully everyone has had an opportunity to review it. And this is something that we will vote on, but I do want to pause and just see if there's any questions on the work plan as it's written now. And if so, I'm not going to go down in order. I think we can just have a general discussion. So I'm just going to open it up to you guys if there's any comments on the work plan itself, any changes or additions or something you're maybe not comfortable with.
This is Mike. I think the only question I had was if there's any material change from the work plan from 2020 to 2021 to this plan, or is this pretty much
Deborah, you
identical?
can help me with this, but it looks the same to me.
It is a consistent format. Yeah, there's really nothing new with this plan. Just refreshing it, updating dates.
We did make a few minor wording changes just to clarify and bring in consistency with some language in the LDO and things, or I'm sorry, yeah, well, the account ordinances that, again, nothing substantive, just wordsmithing some things. So it is generally the same, Mr. Roselli, than it was last year.
Thank you.
You didn't get any
I would have been
super new
disappointed if you had to
tasks.
change something.
Yeah, of course. I'm a lawyer. I got to change it just for principle if I see it.
I have
Any
a
other
question.
comments from any of the other board members on the work plan?
Steve, I have a question.
Sure.
Can we have an explanation of item 1 to formulate and recommend to the town council the performing of studies and surveys? Have we taken action on that in any of the past 2 years? Like
That is, I'm very glad you brought that up. That is something that the board has rarely done, but to me, it is something that we should think about doing. And
Yeah.
we have to be careful, that we don't, the staff is constantly studying things. And I'll give you an example of one that I was going to actually propose last year. But the staff was all over it, and that was parking. You know, I thought that the
Yeah.
board would have been a really good resource for any kind of a parking study, just based on what each of us do in our main for our main job. Um, and I think as the year goes on, if there's other items similar to that we see recurring, we have the ability to recommend a study, and I don't think we should hold back from doing it. Deborah's probably cringing right now while I'm saying this, but
Yeah, we're not,
I,
we're definitely receptive to things that you'd like to have us look at, and parking was the perfect example. You saw zoning condition after zoning condition come forward with requests for modifications with, either PDDs or MXD zoning requesting reductions to parking standards. So that was the perfect topic. There's,
what you
Yeah.
guys, as
you may
usual,
get some ideas following the
yep.
brief training program we have. You may get ideas about other topics that you'd like us to dive into a little bit further. So by all means, studies, and even if you'd like a little bit more of an in-depth training and understanding, a couple years ago, we spent some time talking about buffers and
Yep.
where they were required and how they operated and functioned. So if there's a topic that's of interest to you, we're definitely receptive to hearing
I mean,
that.
one of the topics that that I think about a lot, that I just haven't really put words around it yet, is development that's going to be happening, and how do we suggest, or what would the town's role be in ensuring that infrastructure is put in place for EV charging. It's not a big deal now, but it will be a big deal years from now. But things that we're building now, somebody should be thinking about it. I'll give you an example. You buy a house today, it has a plug in the house for a dryer. While you're building something, it'd be very easy to put an outlet in for EV charging. And that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. And you guys think about stuff along those lines, and I would be thrilled to take something forward to the staff and along those lines, and we could be part of a study.
I would ask, I mean, so we're still talking about the work plan, which I think, thank you for clarifying item number 1. So is there a formal process through which we recommend? Do we have to create an agenda item, or how does that work?
It would be a discussion item that would be added to the agenda.
Okay.
And the board would, I'll just say, if I was doing it, I would put something together. I would take it to the staff and say, and I'll go back to my example. Hey, I want to throw this out as a potential study, because I would want to be guided by their thoughts on it, and then it would eventually be an agenda item and a discussion item at a future meeting.
Okay, that makes sense. So with that clarification, I feel very comfortable supporting the work plan that's been drafted for us to
Excellent.
take action on.
Any other thoughts from the board on the work plan itself? Any other questions or thoughts?
This is just a learning kind of a question. You hit on number 1 there, but it says, to formulate and recommend to the town council. But what we just talked about, could you preempt the town council and just have discussion and have staff help with the study, or do these studies have to be commissioned by town council?
Deborah, I'll let you or Matt help with that answer.
I'll jump in. Yeah, the Planning and Zoning Board doesn't have any authority on their own to commission those types of studies, because those normally would require the retention of a firm of some kind, a third-party contract, payment of money to perform the studies. Is normally how we do it here in Kerry. It's not done normally on a staff level. And even if it were, it is still outside of the purview of the Planning and Zoning Board. You guys are an advisory body and you advise. And so what you would do as Mr. Crutchfield said is you could recommend to the town council that they consider commissioning a study. And the parking is the perfect example. If you all are seeing something continually where it appears that our LDO is out of sync with reality, then you can come in and say, hey, look, we keep seeing this from our standpoint, our unique role in the town. Can you guys think about doing this so we can get some better guidance on this? And then that's how it would be. You guys would vote on it. It would be a formal recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Board that would go to town council for consideration.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, any other
That
thoughts?
was it. And it was really, I didn't know what authority staff had, but you got me there. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Perfect.
Kind of on a separate topic. Thank you, Matt. That was perfect. If there is a training topic and just a little additional information that you'd like to have, that's something that is not, doesn't require a study, but just a deeper understanding of our ordinance, you know, something that we apply on a regular basis in the ordinance and how we do our jobs. If that will help you, you're going to get a taste of that tonight. So that may give you, you know, some ideas about things that you'd like to have a deeper understanding of in the future. So by all means, please reach out to us if there's something that needs a little further explanation.
Okay, perfect. Barring any other discussion of this, would someone like to make a motion to approve the work plan as we see it now on the screen?
This is Don. I make a motion that we approve the 2021-20.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second. This is
Perfect. Okay, I'm just going to call the roll because we will need to vote on this item. Mike Roselli,
aye.
Jessica Pearson,
Aye.
Jeff Moncrief,
Aye.
Don Hamilton, Don, yeah,
Aye.
perfect, thank you. And I, Steve Crutchfield, also vote aye. Okay, that moves us to kind of the main part of tonight's meeting, which is a short training session by the staff. I've been on this board for a while, and I've always found these to be very helpful. You always pick up something that you may not have understood or just may have a question about. And as we were just discussing, I had asked for consideration to add a little bit to our training tonight, which was an overview of the new housing plan that the town council just announced. I think it's something, I know it's got a lot to develop, but I do believe it's something that we will be hearing in future cases down the road. And Deborah was nice enough to put it in there. So I appreciate that. So I will turn this over. I think I'm turning it over to you, Katie.
Yes, excuse me, I was just getting myself unmuted. Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. We are happy to share with you just a brief training tonight. Our goal with this training is to, like Deborah was saying, kind of peel back the curtain a bit so you can see what staff is looking at as we are evaluating rezoning cases using the Imagine Kerry Community Plan, and also, talk to you about, how you as Planning and Zoning Board can also look at the Kerry Community Plan as you're making your evaluations. Our goal with the training tonight is to keep it somewhat informal and conversational. So you're welcome to ask questions along the way. So we're hoping to just be able to talk with you about, the process that we use. We're also going to, when I finish my slides, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about the types of zonings that we see in Kerry, and also spend some time on conditions. And sometimes we see development plans with rezoning cases. So she'll talk a little bit about some of the nuances with that, and then we'll wrap things up by sharing a high-level overview of the housing plan. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. see, hopefully this is advancing the slide. So I'd like to start out by just sharing an overview of the rezoning process in Kerry. And I know that probably all of you are very, very familiar with this process. This is a chart that we share with the public for our monthly neighborhood meetings for rezoning cases. And we find that it's a really helpful chart to explain the various steps that rezoning cases go through. So before any rezoning is actually submitted to the town, we have weekly meetings with the Development Review Committee, and applicants will submit a pre-application meeting, and they'll meet with town staff from different departments that deal with development review. We'll give them feedback on their proposal. They'll take that feedback, work it into an application that they then submit. We have monthly application acceptance periods. Once an application has made it through the acceptance period, we then create a rezoning number, give it an official case name, assign a case manager from the planning department, and start it through the process. There are a number of meetings that all rezonings have to go through, starting with the neighborhood meeting. So these are meetings that we hold monthly. Town staff in the planning department, we facilitate these meetings. Since COVID, they've been virtual. And like Deborah was mentioning earlier, virtual has actually been, we found a really good format to actually increase participation. For this particular type of meeting, it doesn't always work with other types, but we found it to be a very actually good format for the neighborhood meetings. The neighborhood meeting is a chance for the applicant to share what they want to do rezoning wise with people that live in the nearby area. It's also a chance for them to hear concerns and feedback from the public. And many times we find that the applicant will take concerns that they hear and work issues into their case to address concerns. So they may add zoning conditions, make changes to their preliminary development plan to address concerns that they hear. It will then, after the neighborhood meeting, within a few months, be scheduled before the town council for a public hearing. And then following that public hearing, council may give some general feedback at that meeting. They'll forward it to the planning and zoning board. So then that's when this board comes in. So just keep in mind, by the time a case gets to this board, it's generally evolved, and you guys see that as we present kind of the history of a case each month. It will have evolved from that initial submittal through various, feedback opportunities that the applicants receive from both council as well as the public. And then after you guys make a recommendation on the case, it will go back to the town council. And as many of you know, if the recommendation is unanimous, it goes on what's called the consent agenda for the town council. And that means council can take action on the case with a batch of other cases at one time. If the recommendation from the planning and zoning board is a split vote, or if it's recommended to be inconsistent, the case goes on the discussion agenda, which means that staff will make a presentation. The council will consider the case, and then they'll take a vote. So that's the practice that we follow here, and the vote that the planning and zoning board makes will determine its placement on the agenda. So as I mentioned, before a case is sent to the planning and zoning board, it has had a public hearing with the town council. With public hearings, we send notice to property owners within 800 feet of a site. We also post the property on Kerry's website. We have public hearing notices, and we put blue public hearing signs up at the site. So we've had a chance to collect public hearing feedback, excuse me, before. Excuse me, before a case will go, back to the planning and zoning board.
Ms. Dry, are you okay?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Excuse me, just dealing with a little bit of a fall cold. So thank you. So how is a rezoning case evaluated? One thing we wanted to talk to you all about tonight is what the staff looks at, excuse me, as well as what the planning and zoning board will look at. And that is consistency with the Kerry community plan. The council can look at things a little bit differently. They can look at the Kerry community plan, but they could also look at other guiding documents as well, and take in general feedback from the public. So the view that the planning and zoning board has, as well as the staff has, is a little bit more narrow. So that's just something to keep in mind. So to get access to the Kerry community plan, it's on the town's website under projects and initiatives. And each of you should also have access to a hard copy of the plan. And some of our new board members, if you have not had a chance to receive your hard copy, you can contact the board clerk, Julie Mitchell, and we can help coordinate getting that to you. So sometimes it is helpful to actually have that hard copy at your desk as you're flipping through the case. What I'd like to do is just at a high level start by reviewing the table of contents for the Kerry community plan. You'll find that each of the chapters are just one word, and the name of the chapter very appropriately covers its title. When staff looks at rezoning cases, we are focusing on kind of these core chapters here. So we're looking at live, and that covers housing, types of housing, densities, things like that. We look at work, that's employment opportunities. Shop, that's, you know, commercial centers. Engage, that covers parks and rec. Consideration also covers historic preservation. Shape, that's our chapter that talks about how we want the town to grow, where land uses will go. Then of course, move is our transportation chapter. One thing we'd like to introduce to you all tonight is the serve chapter. This is not a chapter that we've evaluated previously. I'll talk a little bit about what's within the serve chapter. It's something that we will start evaluating the applications that were submitted in May of 2021. So you all have not seen any cases before you yet that have evaluated the serve chapter, but you will within the next few months. And we'll be sure to call that to your attention as you start to see those cases, so you can be prepared to add that to your list of evaluation criteria. So I have just a few excerpts from staff reports to talk through. I do not want you guys to read what's on the screen, like read all the text, but just to give you an idea of the structure of the staff report and how we as staff are looking at rezoning cases. So for example, if we have a case that is proposing residential, we'll typically start looking at the live chapter. We'll scan through all of the policies in the live chapter, and we as staff will pick out policies that we believe are applicable to the case. And keep in mind, this is our professional opinion, and you as a planning and zoning board can scan the live chapter as well and make different observations. And we certainly hope that you feel free to do so as well. So sometimes we'll find that a case will further some of the policies. Sometimes we'll find that a case may struggle to further a policy, and we'll try to call that out as we're doing our evaluation. Sometimes we'll find that a case will be a little bit of a mix where it furthers some elements of the policy and then struggles to comply with others. So we'll try to call that out in the staff report. Sometimes we will find that a chapter applies. Sometimes we find that a chapter may not apply. So I've got the work chapter shown here as an example. Sometimes when we're dealing with residential development, we may not call attention to the work chapter because we've scanned the policies and we don't feel like it makes or it applies greatly. But again, you as the planning and zoning board members could look at it and say, you know what, I actually think it does further this policy. So you're welcome to call that out. There are, another example is a shop chapter that's dealing with retail, commercial options, and sometimes that applies, sometimes it doesn't. The engage chapter, that deals with parks and recreation opportunities. We reference the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan. We'll always identify if there's parks or greenway facilities, within a nearby region or nearby distance for sites that we're looking at. The Engage chapter also includes historic preservation. So if there's no historic sites or sites that have historic significance on a site, we will call that out in the staff report. Sometimes we do have sites that have got considerations regarding historic preservation. If that's the case, we will also talk about that in the staff report. That would be within the Engage chapter. And just so you are aware, we as staff in the planning department are reaching out to staff from each department who works in these areas to gather our analysis. So when we are looking at the parks plan, we are reaching out to our parks and facilities planners. Yes. You have a question?
Yeah, I do. So I'm just wondering when the process starts with the initial pre-application meeting, does this analysis of the Imagine Carey plan, does that start at that point? And you kind of build the report or so by the time we see it, you've been working on it for several months?
It does. It starts at a very, very high level, when an applicant comes in for a pre-application meeting. This is the Imagine Carey plan is actually the document that we as staff are going to first and foremost to give feedback on what we see. And then once it comes in as conditions build, that that evaluation will grow. So there's generally it's a preliminary recommendation, but we've had a few months to build that recommendation by the time we bring a case before the Planning and Zoning Board.
Thank you.
Yes. I'll also mention when it comes to the Engage chapter, we have the town of Kerry has a historic preservation planner. So if there's a site that has a historic resource on it, we will be working with the historic preservation planner on an analysis of that as well. The Future Growth Framework Map is found in the Shape chapter. That's chapter 6 of the Kerry Community Plan. This is what you would typically see as a future land use map. With the Kerry Community Plan, we have a more policy-based approach. So it's not parcel specific. We have general land use categories. But you will find with rezoning cases, we are always going to look at what the Future Growth Framework Map says for an area, and that provides us guidance on whether or not the use, the buffers, the densities are appropriate. In the Future Growth Framework Map, a few things I'd like to just call to your attention is you'll notice there are 4 live categories. So we've got heritage neighborhood, mixed neighborhood, traditional, suburban. So 4 of these categories are residentially focused. That means you'll see mostly residential development there, but you could see some non-residential development on the edges and pods, along thoroughfares, things like that. We have 4 categories that are considered shop. That's the commercial center, commercial mixed use, destination center, and downtown. That's where you would see more mixing of uses. Some of the retail commercial uses, you would see higher density uses for residential, things like that. We have a parks and recreation or park and open space designation. And then we have 2 categories for work. One is business industrial park, and then employment mixed use campus. And then you can see the color coordination for each of these growth framework map categories on this map here. The map also includes 5 special planning areas. That's the Eastern Kerry Special Planning Area, the Downtown Special Planning Area. We've got the Historic Carpenter Special Planning Area, Green Level, and then we've got the Chatham Kerry Joint Land Use Plan. So that's just a quick overview of what the map looks like. And then what we're going to do is we're going to find where on the map this parcel is and do our evaluation based on that guidance that the plan gives us. I'd like to spend just a little bit more time on special planning areas. I mentioned that we have 5 in Kerry. Special planning areas are areas where we believe additional policy guidance is needed, and council believed that as well when they adopted the Kerry Community Plan. So anytime we have a rezoning within an area, within a special planning area, you're going to see probably a lot more staff analysis when it comes to that site. And that's because the plan gives us a lot more guidance. So with the Eastern Kerry Gateway, we've got sub areas. Each of those sub areas have policy guidance that's a lot more specific than in other parts of town. So just be prepared if you see a rezoning case in a special planning area, there's going to be a more robust analysis. And that's just because it's in a special area that we have a lot of guidance and we really want to see it developed in a nice way.
Excuse me, Katie.
Yes.
Looks like we have dropped one of our board members.
Okay.
I don't see Jeff Moncrief on the call.
And he actually did just call me. He said his computer logged him out, so he is in the process of starting that back up and coming in. So.
Okay. Would if you'd like, would the board like for me to just pause while we wait for our board member to rejoin us? I'm happy to do so.
Sure.
I think it'd be okay if you kept going. I think it'd be fine.
Okay.
I'm back too, so.
Oh, excellent.
Perfect, perfect.
Okay. Great timing. All right. So let's move on to the next slide. So now I'd like to talk just briefly about the new analysis that you all will be seeing. What I'm showing you here is an excerpt from the first page of the serve chapter. So if you have your plan, when you're flipping it to the various chapters, what we're looking at right now is that very first page when you open to the serve chapter. And you'll notice in the first page, there are 3 values that are listed on that first page. One is respecting nature and the environment. Second is providing comprehensive and top quality facilities and infrastructure. Third is providing high quality public service. So you'll notice with those values, the second and the third are really focused on town services and facilities. So for the most part, they may not apply as closely to rezoning. So we may not evaluate those as much because they're more focused on town services. But you may see those from time to time. We anticipate most of our analysis will focus on the first value, which is respecting nature and the environment. So that's nature and the environment will be what we will be analyzing, we believe. So Carey's staff has spent some time just thinking through preliminarily how we will conduct our analysis. And a few things I'd like to just draw to your attention is Carey has some fairly robust regulations already in place when it comes to respecting the nature and environment. We have open space requirements, strong buffer requirements, very good stormwater requirements. And we will provide a description of those requirements in the updated staff reports that you guys will see. There are zoning conditions, however, that we believe applicants could consider offering as they're looking to speak to the serve chapter. They don't have to do this. You know, Deborah will talk to you in a minute about how zoning conditions are voluntary, but you know, there are conditions that they could consider. So some conditions that we believe you could be seeing as a result of serve chapter analysis could be things like not counting lot area and stream buffers towards minimum lot sizes, low impact development standards, underground stormwater utility devices, limiting or reducing impervious surfaces, green roofs, using and preserving native plants, Also, street buffers and streetscapes and buffers. Applicants could propose to not clear and grade or reduce streetscapes and buffers. And they would do that through offering a condition that the streetscapes would remain undisturbed. They could also increase the width of the streetscapes or buffers, or planting standards within those. We've got EV charging stations, renewable energy, and protection of tree canopy. So that is just a few examples that we have vetted that we think could come before you in the form of zoning conditions. There would certainly be other ones, but this is just a starting list to begin thinking through. And the last slide I'm going to leave you with before I turn it over to Deborah is consideration. So as you're looking through the Kerry community plan, some of the considerations that you could think through, and these are things that staff are thinking through as well, is the use appropriate? And we're looking at, is it appropriate at the location that they're proposing it? So we have to evaluate that future growth framework map, as well as other uses in the area. Also transitions, those are very important. Transitions can be performed through buffers. That would be like a natural buffer, through vegetative screening. It could also be the height, the massing of a building. Could also be a use. So for example, townhomes can be a transitional use between like a commercial use on one side and maybe single family on the other. So the use itself could be a transition. When it comes to residential uses, you can look at things like unit types, the densities that are proposed, the amount of open space and gathering area. And then for non-residential uses, you could look at transitions, parking, just to give a few examples. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Deborah. And once she's finished, we're happy to continue answering questions and have further discussion.
Thank you, Katie. It's good to be presenting to you all again. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about zoning in general. And then when it comes to conditions and some of the topics that might concern you or staff, what are some of the things that we can and we can't consider? Next slide, please. So when we talk about zoning, there's something called a general use district. So when I moved to Kerry in 1965 in Hillsdale Forest, it was a general use district. It was R12, residential 12. That meant that the lot sizes needed to be 12,000 square feet. This is also referred to as a traditional or a conventional zoning district. When you have a general use district, all the property in that general use district is the same. Everybody's got to meet the same standards, lot sizes, use categories as described in our land development ordinance. So the same rules apply to everybody. So that was real common in the mid 1960s. It was common in the 1970s. Then what we started to see happen in the early 1990s was something called conditional use districts. And when you look at our maps online, when you look at Kerry's official zoning map, you'll see these areas that have hatch marks on them. So you see what's the base zoning, that yellow, which was the R12, and then it's got the hatch marks. That's a pretty good indication that that's going to be a conditional use district. It's gotten extremely popular recently. In fact, so popular that there's some blogs about conditional use districts and conditional use zoning with the School of Government. And that's where I got some additional information and was able to check some of my facts. One tidbit of information I thought was kind of interesting to share. They did a survey in 2018, just noticing how popular conditional use zoning districts were getting. And they found that in large populations, cities and municipalities with more than 25,000 people, 75% of the zoning cases that they had were conditional use zoning. So I went back this afternoon and just looked at what we did in 2018. Anybody want to wager a guess at what percentage of Kerry's rezoning cases in 2018 were conditional use or PDD zoning? 90%.
90, oh,
90%. So conditional use districts are popular in Kerry.
I was going to say, I heard the word PDD lots of times, so
Yep.
I was going to go high.
Yep, it was indeed. All right, next slide, please. So with zoning conditions and conditional uses, one of the most important things to remember, they must be voluntarily offered by the applicant. The Planning and Zoning Board can say, I'm concerned that this density may be too high, or I'm concerned the building may be higher than I think is appropriate. I would feel more comfortable if the building wasn't so tall, or I would feel more comfortable supporting this from the shape chapter perspective if the applicant had buffers that made for better transition. But you can't say, dear applicant, if you'll offer this zoning condition, I'm going to approve this case or vote for approval. We've got to remember it's very important that the owner of the land or the applicant is the one that's volunteering the conditions. That said, they still need to be mutually agreed upon between the applicant and the municipality. Somebody can offer a zoning condition, but the town can say, no, we're not going to accept that. The town council has the ultimate authority to say, we're not going to accept that, especially if we feel that a condition is not enforceable. And from time to time, we've had some zoning cases come forward where someone would say, well, could you limit the hours of operation? There was a proposal in Weston not too long ago where there was an existing office building. It had been there for 30 years. And there was a video game company that wanted to move in and take over the building. And some of the neighbors wanted to know, well, can they limit the hours of operation to 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.? Well, not only did the applicant not want to offer that because they sometimes have staggered shifts, it's very hard to enforce. What if you have people working late at night, or what if you have a special project going on? So hours of operation are an example of something that can be challenging to enforce. Next slide, please. When you look at a zoning condition, something that's important to do is to consider the scope of the zoning condition and how it's supposed to work. And if offered, a zoning condition should be to address impacts reasonably expected to be generated by the development or the use of the site. So if somebody's proposing a commercial use, for example, they might want to limit certain uses such as automotive repair or certain types of factory uses because of the proximity of that development to a residential neighborhood. So that's an example of offering a zoning condition that's addressing the impacts that might be generated by the development of that site. Next slide, please. What's very common with conditional use zoning districts is for somebody to put a limitation or to specify a specific use. For example, we see a number of requests for residential multifamily conditional use. Now, why would somebody ask for residential multifamily rather than just transitional residential if we know that they want to do townhouses? Any speculation on that from the board? Why they would go with RMF, which sounds more intense?
Does it help with lot coverage and building height?
It helps with density.
Density, okay.
So transitional residential gives you a density cap of 6 dwelling units per acre. Residential multifamily lets you go up to 12 dwelling units per acre. But RMF, residential multifamily, especially if you're adjacent to an existing detached residential neighborhood, might seem like too intense an impact to those adjacent neighbors. So applicants from time to time will offer to limit the use to townhouses. Even though residential multifamily allows townhouses and multifamily and duplexes, they might set a specific use category and set that limitation. So that's an example of how a conditional use district limits use. Next slide, please. Something else that they might do is set higher standards. It's important to remember with conditional use zoning, unless it's a PDD or MXD, but with just straight conditional use, conditions must be more restrictive than the land development ordinance. For example, somebody wants to offer residential 8 conditional use. R8 straight general zoning means lot sizes of 8,000 square feet or greater. So one of the neighborhoods I showed you with the hatch marks earlier was down on the edge of an existing Wake County subdivision that had large lot, quarter-acre lot houses and lots. The neighbors didn't want an R8 development coming in next door. The developer needed the flexibility, so they asked for R8, but then offered a zoning condition that the minimum lot size would be 12,000 square feet. So that gave a feel of a neighborhood that was comparable to the existing neighborhood, but they didn't have such huge rear yard setbacks. Like with R8 zoning, all you need is a 20-foot rear yard setback, whereas R12 needs a 25-foot rear yard setback. Gave them a little bit more flexibility. And then they offered that the minimum side yards would be 10 feet. So there's all sorts of ways that developers and builders can find to offer conditional uses that help, especially with infill development, put those adjacent property owners at ease. Next slide, please. And I mentioned that there are some exceptions with MXD zoning where the applicant submits a preliminary development plan. This is also a form of a conditional use district, just like a planned development district is conditional. There are certain conditions that are tied to it. In these cases, this is an opportunity where the developer or the applicant can ask for modifications in exchange for quality design or unique design or a really good mix of uses that promotes walkability, vertical or horizontal integration between different land uses. By doing that, you and the council might be more inclined to be supportive of higher densities or reduced buffers, or perhaps the removal of a champion tree. So that's what happens with MXD zoning. With the MXD zoning, you get much more detail. You see this picture that shows you where to expect the buildings, where to expect the road network, where the buffers are going to be, and which pods the different uses are going to be located on. Next slide, please. Other zoning conditions you might see are related to infrastructure. So every time somebody submits a rezoning application, we always ask whether or not a traffic impact analysis is required or a traffic study. And that is required if the proposed zoning generates 100 or more peak hour trips. Peak hours are weekdays, typically in the mornings between 7 and 9 a.m., I believe, or maybe between 6 and 9 a.m. And then in the evenings between 4 and 6 p.m. And then there's going to be a report that's generated if that TIA is required. The applicant will have the opportunity to look at the improvements that are recommended by that report, and they may wish to consider them, or they may wish to say, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to offer to do this off-site road improvement because we feel, even though that's important, our rezoning is only generating a 2% increase in traffic. These problems existed before this development came forward. We're going to do our part, which is required to make road improvements across the property frontage, but we're not going to offer off-site road improvements. Or they may say, we know we need to offer this off-site road improvement because it's critical both to the success of our development and we feel that we're adding impacts. So you're going to see a detailed analysis of traffic mitigations in our staff reports when a TIA is required, a traffic impact analysis. Next slide, please. And then finally, you will see conditions from time to time that deal with social equity. And you'll probably see more and more of this going forward as we start looking at things like workforce housing and affordable housing and senior or age-restricted housing. So these are conditions that applicants offer from time to time to address current needs and current trends. They've heard from council members, about growing demand. They've heard in the housing study about the aging population in Kerry. So developers may offer zoning conditions that address those concerns. Next slide, please. So some things that are important to realize: there are some conditions that we can accept, and that's anything that discriminates against anyone because of their race, ethnic background, or religious beliefs. We also cannot regulate who owns the development or whether it's owner or renter occupied. You've heard us refer to multifamily residential. What you don't hear us say, unless we slip, is apartments or condominiums. It's because we don't say whether it's rented or owned property. So we look at the use rather than who owns the property. Not to say it doesn't come up from time to time, but those are things that we should not be considering. Next slide, please. So here's a little quiz for the board members. Anybody can answer this, yes or no. Would this be an appropriate zoning condition? All multifamily units shall have granite countertops.
No.
No, good. Whoever said no, that's appropriate. And no is the right answer, mainly because it's not really addressing any impacts. But even more importantly, it's not enforceable. We don't go inside and inspect the countertops. So good, whoever got the no there. Next slide, please. All right, yes or no?
Yes.
Retail spaces greater than 30,000 square feet shall be limited to specialty grocery stores.
I say yes. Didn't we just have a rezoning case that had a condition that limited the square footage of the grocery store?
Yeah, down off of 55.
This is kind of a trick question. You're almost right. You're almost right.
I said yes, so how can I be almost right?
There's one word in here that's problematic.
Specialty, like how do you
There you
define
go.
specialty?
Who said specialty?
Oh,
Mike,
Very good. So that was the trick word there, because we do not define specialty grocery stores in our land development ordinance. But we actually did have this zoning condition about 20 years ago, and it was modified. It was with the Searstone development, and they did want to promote specialty grocery stores. That can be problematic because something can go from being a specialty grocery store one day to just a regular grocery store the next. All right, next slide. Let's do one more. All right, yes or no, a decorative entry monument shall be provided at the corner of High House and Davis Drive. Got a trick word in here again.
is the trick word decorative?
Decorative.
You got it. Decorative. Who defines decorative? What's decorative to one person may not be decorative to another person. So those are some of the things that we vet when we're reviewing zoning conditions. Before it gets to you, many times we try to go through and make sure that the conditions are clear and enforceable and as defined by our ordinance. Next slide, please. So few more things, not really zoning conditions, but topics that come up from time to time. What are the price points of the homes? Does this get asked a lot at those neighborhood meetings that we have the first of every month? You better believe it does come up, especially when it's an infill development. Somebody's trying to put in houses next to an existing neighborhood. But that's part of why staff facilitates those meetings. And we try to politely say to the developer, now you do realize that is not a zoning condition. That could change. The other thing that could change is who is the developer. The zoning conditions run with the land. Who's the builder going to be? That changes periodically as well, as does the timeline for the development. They may have a general idea of when they'd like to start, but it can't be a zoning condition. And what school will the students in this neighborhood attend? Student housing and assignment, not housing, student assignment is managed by the county. And even though it is a concern to all of us, it should not be something that factors into the decision making. So those are some important topics. Next slide, please.
Deborah, can I have a comment on that?
Yes.
One of the things that I've noticed in the meetings over the years is while the developers don't say, hey, this is a $500,000 townhouse, they will say, this is high end, high quality, luxury. They have little words they say.
That is a
include-
perfect topic to bring up. They should not do that. They should put their words into something tangible and measurable. What they can do with that is they can say, you know, these units will have 2-car garages. They can say these townhouses shall be end units only. You know, they can be grouped together kind of in a duplex style, but on an individual lot, so that they give the appearance and the look of a detached residential house. But with end units, then you've got windows on the end and you've got the scale and massing feels more like a detached residential product. They can say these units shall have a certain percentage of masonry material. So there's lots of things that a developer can offer that does guarantee quality in terms of more expensive or a more aesthetically pleasing look. If that's something that's important to the adjacent property owners, they can increase the community gathering space. They can increase the width of their buffers or the plant materials in their buffers. But we really do try to encourage them. And it's fine if the board would like to say to the applicant, tell me, what do you mean by high quality? You know, what do you mean by luxury? What is it about this product that you are offering in the form of a zoning condition that guarantees that? So any other questions on the topic of zoning conditions?
I have a question. This seems to come up on residential rezonings. I think, do staff try to indicate the underlying zoning that the property is? Like if it's a lower density than what is being requested in the rezoning, so that the board can consider how the density is increasing? Is that something that's historically
Yes,
presented?
we have, we typically have dimensional standard charts in our staff report that'll do an analysis. Not in every single staff report, each case is a little bit different, but you know, we'll do a comparison if somebody's changing a zoning from, for example, somebody's going from residential 40 to R12 or going from residential 40 to transitional residential. We'll put a chart that compares what the existing density is and what the proposed density is. And something that we all try to be prepared for, Katie and Aaron and Anna and everybody else who's coming forward to you with rezoning cases, we try to spend a little time before the presentation to look at the surrounding neighborhoods and the densities, so that if you're looking at what's proposed and what's in front of you, and you want to ask the question, what's the density of this adjacent neighborhood? We try to have that ready for you. So I tried to always do that. Katie actually made that a standard operating procedure for our team, is to say, put together your, you know, your fact sheet before the presentation, so that you've got certain key notes of information handy and at your fingertips, because understanding densities and how densities work together and how compatible they are is very important. And
Yeah,
the
I
other
would
thing that
agree.
we try to, the message we try to send is compatible doesn't necessarily mean identical. And you'll hear us say that from time to time. Just because there's an existing large lot subdivision that's been there for decades and everybody's got half-acre lots, things are changing. Land has gotten very expensive, and you can have a very, very nice development that doesn't necessarily have to look exactly like that. Make sure there's a nice buffer in between the two different uses. And we've even got some old neighborhoods in Kerry, Pirates Cove off of Southeast Maynard Road. I use that as an example from time to time. That was way ahead of its time. There was a townhome development right on the edge of a R12 development. So compatible does not necessarily mean they have to be identical. So any other questions about conditional use zoning and certain things to avoid, or questions that are good to ask or not to ask? Okay, and then just one parting word of caution on that topic. If a developer reaches out to you, as Mr. Crutchfield was saying, and they talk about, quality, luxury, just high-end design, if they show you pictures and they show you something that's not been included as an exhibit, that's actually part of the zoning conditions, look at that carefully. Take that with a grain of salt as well. That might just be an illustration of how something might conceptually be laid out. But it's always good to ask that question. Now, is this a zoning condition? Is this exhibit part of what you've submitted to staff to vet as your conditions?
And Deborah, if I could add, one other thing that comes up from time to time is sometimes a developer will indicate, or a representative, an applicant's representative will indicate that they are prepared to offer new zoning conditions. And just one thing that this board can't do is accept new zoning conditions, on the spot. So if they come before you and they're telling you that they're going to be offering new zoning conditions, you'll need to make a recommendation based on what's before you in the staff report, and not based on, a proposed zoning condition that a developer is bringing the night of the meeting.
Thank you, Katie. That's excellent. That has happened in the past.
Yeah.
Very, very awkward. Applicant sees that the board might not be inclined to support the proposal. They're kind of getting a feel from the board that they're not warming to the proposal. So the applicant will say, well, how would you feel about it if we offered 2 more electric vehicle charging stations? What we really want them to do before they go to the planning and zoning board is make sure that you are seeing the finished product. And we tell the applicants, if they are adding zoning conditions after the planning and zoning board has made a recommendation, sometimes the council will say, okay, well, this was in direct response to a concern that the planning and zoning board had. And so they might be inclined to be supportive of what's come before them for final action. But the council can also choose to forward the case back to the planning and zoning board for them to review again if they feel the changes were really substantial. So thank you, Katie. Thanks for bringing that up. But we don't want them offering zoning conditions at the podium and then you taking a vote based on what is a possible new zoning condition. They need to get that to us 15 business days before the meeting so that we've got time to vet it, make sure it's enforceable.
We actually
included in the
have
staff
to,
report.
we actually have to receive a signed affidavit
Mhm.
from each of the property owners or the applicant, which is saying that they have freely offered these zoning conditions. So sometimes we have a zoning case where there's 5 or more property owners, and in those cases, each of those property owners has to sign an affidavit. It has to be notarized saying that they offer these zoning conditions. So and that's another reason why we wouldn't want to accept a conditional spot, because the developer may say that they're willing to offer this, but we don't have the signature from these 5 property owners, and we don't know if they would all agree to that.
So now you guys are ready to teach a class on conditional use zoning?
I'm not sure about that.
So let's move on to the next slide. Mr. Crutchfield asked for an overview or high-level overview of the Imagine Kerry Community Plan. And I'm sorry, the Kerry Housing Plan. And Morgan Mansa, who is our housing manager, could not be with us tonight, but she would like to spend some time with the board in the future. If you'd like her to come back and go into this a little bit more deeply, but just on a high level, what I'd like to share with you is that, like the Imagine Kerry Community Plan, the recently adopted Kerry Housing Plan is a guide and a vision document to help inform staff and the council with some of our decisions related to housing. And it's a really important first step as we continue to develop some of the existing and expand some of the housing related goals and actions that we've got. Next slide, please. This was just adopted at the town council meeting on Tuesday night. As you may know, we've had housing plans in the past. We've had affordable housing plans in the past. This document was not referred to as an affordable housing plan. It actually was referred to that way a couple of times, but that's not the title of it. It is Kerry's Housing Plan because it's a really broad reaching plan that looks at both an inventory of existing housing stock. It looks at an analysis of new trends and development changes. It looks at population and demographic changes. It looks at some of our housing programs, some of the existing ones, and talks about housing needs for the whole community. What was new about this housing plan is there was more attention paid to some of the environmental policies that Katie talked about, an increased focus on the connection between housing and transit. We talk about the BRT lines in the Imagine Kerry Community Plan. There's a heightened awareness of that and references to transit-oriented development. So that's something you'll be hearing more about in the future. A little bit more focus on the needs of special populations, both seniors and persons with disabilities. There's a prioritization on ownership opportunities, home ownership. And a minute ago, I talked about how, we can't take that into consideration when it comes to conditional use zoning, but this is separate. The housing plan can focus on programs that help promote home ownership. And then it talks about housing as a priority across all income levels in Kerry, not just looking at affordable housing for people with financial needs. Next slide. So what does this mean to you? How does this housing plan impact the planning and zoning board members? Well, the most immediate impact that you'll see is going to be as it relates to future action items with land development ordinance amendments, as we refer to them as ACT items. So there's some action items in the plan and some recommendations in the plan. It's very likely you're going to see us come forward to you in the future with a proposal to amend the ordinance when we look at residential multifamily density. We'll probably be looking at ordinance language related to transit-oriented development, especially along the BRT route. And something that you've probably been aware of, accessory dwelling units. It's a big item kind of across the nation. ADUs, also referred to as granny flats or backyard apartments. Right now, we do have accessory dwelling units. They're allowed in the cottage business and residential zoning district in downtown Kerry. So we've got a couple of them there. They're allowed in R40 and they're allowed in R20, but we don't have them in the majority of the zoning districts in Kerry. There's a couple of the PDDs like the Carpenter Village Planned Development District up off of Morrisville Carpenter Road that actually built into their planned development district studio apartments above garages. But just for the general use zoning districts, like the R12 zoning district, we don't have accessory dwelling units there. So that's something we're gonna talk about. We're not just gonna come forward with an ordinance amendment. We're gonna probably do an executive summary in a white paper and put it in front of council before we start the work on that. But we've heard that there's a high demand for something like that. So I do anticipate that being on the horizon for you all. So that's, you know, as I said, this would be very high level. If you haven't had a chance to see the plan, I don't know that it is been uploaded on our website yet. I did go into the agenda for the staff reports for the council meeting, and I was able to open the document and have a chance to go through and read it. It's 45 pages, but it's a pretty quick and a very, very informative and interesting read. You know, again, talking about, you know, some of the trends that we've seen. I've heard a lot of people say there's too many apartments in Kerry, and the plan actually shows you that with our housing, it's only a small percentage, only about 25% of the multifamily residential. So there's some good information and some facts and clarifications in there. And I don't think I have any other slides, Katie. I think the last one was probably, yep, that was it. So what I would like to ask is, would you all like us to look for a time for our housing manager, Morgan, to come and talk a little bit further about this?
I think if we have a future work session, my feeling is we definitely would like to. I just see this as really a, you know, just a passion that seems to be behind this, that we will see a lot. And I know it's in its infancy, and I really appreciate you doing this just so that we would have an understanding of some of the terms. And I think this gives us a great start.
Okay, super. We will put that on our radar. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think that was, is that wrap us up on the work session?
Yeah, that's everything that we wanted to teach you tonight.
It was good. Don't read anything into that.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's always, we are always open to, you know, providing more information and talking through why, you know, something is done a certain way or what the wording or the terminology means. And
I think this
helping,
works
yeah.
very well. I mean, you know, as you know, we used to have work sessions in addition to the meetings, and this is a good way to, even though this is an official meeting and the attendance, you know, this counts. We didn't have to add an extra time, and we were able to utilize it. So I think it was a great use of the time, and we'll do that maybe again in the future should you guys give us another break. You've
Yeah.
always got so much in the pipeline. We don't get very many of these.
Well, even if we have a light agenda, that's something that we can look at doing as well, you know, rolling something in so that there's a chance to, you know, dive a little deeper into some of the topics or understanding some of the ordinances or terminology. We're certainly happy to do that.
Awesome. Okay, then if that's the end of the presentations, I would truly thank you for doing this for us. That's a plural you, and it was beneficial, and I really appreciate it. If there's not any other comments, that really brings us to the conclusion of tonight's meeting. I thank everyone for attending, and again, I thank the staff for their hard work and dedication. Everybody have a wonderful rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.